There is a voice inside you that speaks before you even open your mouth. It tells you that you are not ready, that you are not smart enough, not disciplined enough, not talented enough, not simply fundamentally enough. And the strangest part is this: you have never once questioned where that voice came from. You just assumed it was you. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what you are about to hear will change the way you hear that voice forever. By the end of this video, you will understand something that most people never discover in an entire lifetime. And it might be the single most important thing you ever learn about yourself. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. A feeling of not being good enough is not a flaw in your personality. It is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is, in fact, one of the oldest and most universal experiences a human being can have. Kings have felt it. Geniuses have felt it. The people you admire most, the ones who seem untouchable, confident, complete, they have felt it too, often more intensely than you would ever imagine. But here is where it gets interesting. If this feeling is so universal, why does it feel so personal? Why does it feel like your secret, your shame, your private defect that no one else could possibly understand? The answer lies deep in the architecture of the human mind, and once you see it, you will never look at yourself the same way again. Carl Jung, the great psychologist of the unconscious, spent decades studying what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, hide, and refuse to look at directly. He believed that what we cannot accept in ourselves does not disappear. It goes underground. It waits. And from that hidden place, it shapes our thoughts, our fears, our relationships, without us ever realizing it is there. The feeling of not being good enough is often exactly this: a shadow, formed early, buried deep, and left to run quietly in the background of your entire life. You didn't choose it, but you can learn to see it. And seeing it, as you're about to discover, changes everything. Think back for a moment to your childhood, not to find blame, not to relive pain, but simply to notice a pattern. Somewhere, at some point, you learned that love, approval, or safety were conditional. Maybe it was a parent who only smiled when you succeeded. Maybe it was a teacher who compared you to someone else. Maybe it was simply the silence in a room when you needed to be seen and no one looked up. Children do not have the language to understand these moments intellectually, but they understand them emotionally, instantly and permanently. And so a belief is quietly written into the deepest layer of the mind. I am only worthy if I perform. I am only lovable if I achieve. I am only safe if I am impressive. This belief becomes so early, so foundational, that it no longer feels like a belief at all. It feels like a fact. And that is precisely what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable horror of the concentration camps, wrote that everything can be taken from a person except one thing: the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. If a man could find meaning and dignity in the darkest conditions humanity has ever created, then surely the story you tell yourself about your own worth is not fixed. It is not carved into stone. It is a choice, even if it doesn't feel like one yet. And that single realization is the beginning of freedom. But let's go deeper, because there's a reason this feeling refuses to leave you alone, even when logic tells you it should. Neuroscience shows us that the brain is not designed for happiness. It is designed for survival. And to the ancient primitive part of your brain, social belonging was survival. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your tribe didn't just hurt your feelings. It meant possible death. No protection, no food, no safety. So your brain developed an early warning system, a constant background scan for any sign that you might be falling short, might be unworthy, might be at risk of exclusion. That system never got the memo that the world has changed. It still runs today, quietly, relentlessly, mistaking a colleague's blank expression, an unanswered message, or a comparison on social media for a mortal threat to your belonging. This is why the feeling of not being enough can hit you with such force, even over something small. It's not weakness. It's biology, doing an outdated job with outdated tools. And once you understand this, the shame around the feeling begins to dissolve, because you finally see it for what it actually is. Now here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, one that most people never hear, because most people stop at the diagnosis and never reach the door that opens beyond it. The Stoic philosophers, more than 2,000 years ago, understood something about the mind that modern psychology would later prove true. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most respected philosophers of his time, taught that people are disturbed not by events, but by the opinions they hold about those events. Read that again, slowly. It is not the mistake that destroys you. It is the story you tell yourself about the mistake. It is not the rejection that wounds you. It is the meaning you assign to it. This is not a denial of pain. It is something far more powerful. The recognition that between what happens to you and how you feel about it, there is a space. And in that space lies your power. Most people never find that space. They live entirely inside the reaction, convinced that the feeling of inadequacy is the truth, rather than a single interpretation among many possible ones. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled the most powerful empire on earth, wrote privately in his journal, not for an audience, not for approval, but simply to remind himself of the truth he kept forgetting. He reminded himself, again and again, that external validation is fleeting, that the opinions of others are not his to control, and that the only thing truly his own was the quality of his inner judgment. If the most powerful man in the ancient world needed to remind himself daily that he was enough without needing to prove it to anyone, what does that tell you about the nature of this feeling? It tells you that no amount of achievement, power, or status ever fully silences that voice, because the voice was never really about achievement in the first place. It was about a wound that achievement can only temporarily cover, never truly heal. So if success doesn't heal it, what does? This is the question worth sitting with, because the answer isn't what you've been taught to expect, and it isn't what the world around you is constantly selling. You have been told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that the solution to not feeling good enough is to become more, earn more, achieve more, look better, produce more, prove more. But notice something important. If this strategy actually worked, the most successful, most admired people in the world would be immune to this feeling. And yet, so often, they are the ones who feel it most sharply of all, hidden behind achievement, behind applause, behind a mask so convincing that even they sometimes forget it's a mask. This is the trap. Chasing enoughness through achievement is like drinking salt water for thirst. It feels like relief for a moment, and then the thirst returns, stronger than before. The psychologist Carl Rogers, one of the founders of modern humanistic psychology, described something he called unconditional positive regard. The deep human need to be accepted not because of what we do, but simply because of who we are. He believed that psychological well-being begins the moment a person can offer this to themselves, the moment they stop treating their own worth as something to be earned and start treating it as something that was never actually in question to begin with. This is not a soft, comforting idea meant to make you feel better for 5 minutes. It is one of the most radical shifts a human mind can make, because it means the goal was never to become good enough. The goal is to see, finally, that the entire premise was false from the start. Let that settle for a moment, because it is easy to hear and hard to truly absorb. You were never in a competition to earn your own worth. You were only ever in a long, quiet process of forgetting it, and now, slowly, remembering it again. Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher who spent much of his life studying identity and narrative, believed that a human being is, at their core, a story they tell about themselves, and that story can always be reinterpreted. not falsified, not denied. Reinterpreted with honesty, with new understanding, with a wider lens than the one you were given as a child. The events of your past do not change, but the meaning you assign to them can evolve, and when it evolves, you evolve with it. This is not about pretending the wound never existed. It's about finally seeing it clearly enough to stop letting it write the rest of the story. So where does this leave you? Practically, in the quiet moments when that old voice returns, and it will return, because old patterns rarely disappear completely. They simply lose their grip over time. The shift begins with noticing, not fighting the voice, not arguing with it, not trying to silence it through sheer willpower. Simply noticing it, the way you might notice weather passing outside a window. That's the voice again, you say to yourself. That's the old survival system doing its outdated job. Thank you, but I don't need your protection right now. This small act of noticing creates the very space Epictetus spoke about, the space between the event and your reaction to it. And in that space, for the first time, you have a choice you didn't know you had. The shift continues with self-compassion, something research consistently shows is far more effective at creating lasting change than self-criticism ever was. Harsh self-judgment feels productive, but it keeps you locked in the very cycle you're trying to escape, because you cannot punish yourself into feeling worthy. You can only, slowly, patiently, teach yourself a different relationship with your own mind. This doesn't happen overnight, but it happens. And every single person who has ever walked this path started exactly where you are now, doubting, uncertain, wondering if they were the exception, the one person who truly wasn't enough. They weren't the exception, and neither are you. Consider this as we near the end. The very fact that you have watched this far, that you were drawn to a video about this exact feeling, tells you something important. It tells you that some part of you already senses the truth beneath the noise. Some part of you already knows that the voice telling you you're not enough is not the deepest voice inside you. It's simply the loudest, the oldest, the most practiced. Beneath it, quieter, patient, has always been another voice. One that doesn't need proof. One that was never waiting for permission to exist. That voice has been there the entire time, underneath the noise, underneath the striving, underneath every moment you doubted yourself. It didn't go anywhere. You simply stopped listening. You do not need to become someone else to finally feel enough. You do not need one more achievement, one more approval, one more version of yourself that finally meets some invisible standard. You need only to remember what was true before the world ever told you otherwise. That your worth was never something you had to earn in the first place. If this gave you something to sit with today, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps this kind of thinking reach more people who need to hear it. Thank you for spending this time with me.